Hi, this is Dennis Gage. Welcome to a special Legendary Ford's home video edition of My Classic Car. Over the years, I've had the pleasure of traveling the country to cover many of the greatest Fords ever to come out of Dearborn. During the next hour or so, you'll see the original segments as they aired on My Classic Car and hear some of my comments as we take a look back. You'll be treated to some truly awesome cars, like the GT40 and the 427 Comp Cobra, as well as some very special Thunderbirds and Mustangs. A lot of people ask me how I came to host My Classic Car. Well, it's a long story, but it all started with a chance meeting with the show's creator, Brad Kimmel. And the very first segment we ever taped for the program was an interview with David Lobenberg about his awesome 427 Comp Cobra. This segment is still the most popular story we've ever aired on My Classic Car. This is also the day we proved my mustache is not Cobra-proof. Here we are at the DeSoto Speedway down in Bradenton, Florida, with one of these awesome cars, the 427 Cobra, and its lucky owner, David Lobenberg, actually has this and a couple other beauties. But today we're going to talk about this masterpiece, possibly the most awesome, powerful sports car ever built. David, you're a lucky man.
Well, you know, there's a couple other guys that have one, but this one's a little special.
It's a full race.
Full competition Cobra, dry sump oil system. One of three.
One of three.
Right.
It actually has a race history of sorts?
It has a race history. The car number is 3020, and it was originally built and taken to Europe to be a backup car to the GT40 cars at Le Mans, and is documented in the SAC registry. Also, the car's had a sordid history of drivers and historical events and whatnot. At one time, the car was painted yellow with a big black stripe over it. A big black X, and I've been fortunate enough to document that, so I'm real happy about having that photograph. I don't believe it's been seen by too many
Wow.
people.
The competition version, the full race version, had certain differences from the SC, the semi-comp, or what people call the street competition, or the regular, just the plain old 427 Cobra, if there is such a thing. It had the wider rear flares and
Right.
bigger tires. It also had the side pipes.
Right. Oddly enough, the history of the car dates back to when Carroll Shelby was originally building them. They were pretty much all comp cars. But as with these days, and most days, you know, racers run short of funds, and one of Carroll's friends suggested that they document the cars for street use, and therefore they came up with the SC version. But some were specifically set aside for comp cars at that time, and this is one of them.
And this is a 65, but titled in 66, as I understand.
Correct. That's correct.
They say this thing was built on a couple fundamental all-American premises at the time, and that was that there ain't no substitute for cubic inches, and that if a big engine's good, a bigger engine's better. And this was sort of Carroll's dream to build this car.
That's correct. Basically, they just took the 289 chassis and modified the body to hold bigger tires and a little beefier suspension.
They put bigger tubes on it,
bigger tubes.
I believe. And the thing really under this aluminum body is largely a couple rails and a huge engine.
That's truly it. The racers of those days have my blessings for the amount of arm power they had to use to steer these cars to victory.
So David, take me through the interior of a full comp Cobra.
Well, basically, there really isn't a lot of difference between the true Comp Cobra and the street version, other than this particular car, when they did the historical racing with it back in the early 80s, they were required to put a fire system in it, which you can tell by the center red knob.
Yeah.
And then, of course, behind that is a fire extinguisher. So it's been slightly modified to run in today's vintage races. But other than that, it was pretty much standard. This is the package.
Quite a shifter. Points forward. I guess you need that for the lack of elbow room in there.
Exactly. What it is, to be honest with you, is a 65 Mustang shifter turned around backwards. And Carroll was very ingenious to use whatever he could from Ford Motor Company at the time.
Yeah, ingenious is a great word. The Comp Cobras, this whole back end is gas tank. That's a
over 42
gallon tank. Wow. And I imagine it got great mileage, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. I don't think mileage was a concern of the day.
Well, it's a 427 side oiler. Let's have a look at it.
Okay, let's take a peek.
Take me through it, David.
Well, the thing that makes this car really unusual, and I get a lot of questions about this, is this filler cap right here. They always wonder, why is there two filler caps on this car? Well, being a dry sump oil system, the oil is not in the oil case. The oil is kept in a separate tank, and it's pumped through the engine. Makes it a lot safer, and it also adds horsepower. Today, all the Winston Cup cars that you see running around on the Winston circuit, they're all dry sump oil cars.
Well, and as much as they spend at an angle, you probably have to have that.
Exactly. And other than that, it's a 427 slide oiler aluminum head. It's just pretty much the way it was back in 1967.
Cranking out what kind of horsepower?
This car has never been dyno tuned, but I would say it's in the area of about 550, 600 horsepower, and probably the rear wheels upwards of 350 to 390.
Spectacular. You know, with being the race version, she's got the big wide tires on back, and those aren't narrow on front. Wired on knockoffs too.
You know, everything was done for safety back then, even, and the car was delivered originally. This particular color is called Ragoon Red. Most of the cars were just left aluminum, and the number 13 was also part of the original paint scheme for this car. So when it was restored and it was authenticated by Dave Durrell, this is how the car came out of restoration, I guess about 10 years ago.
Wow. Let's see, we're on a track. You don't suppose we could take it for a spin, do you?
I suppose we could. I think Carroll would like that.
I think he would. Let's do this one for Carroll.
Okay, great. Let's go.
There's simply no way to describe the sensation of riding in a 427 competition Cobra. David never pushed the car to its limits, but we did do a few fast laps. The Cobra is an animal, capable of generating incredible G-forces. On this half-mile oval, I had trouble keeping my head straight because of the car's awesome ability to accelerate, brake, and corner. In fact, the tamer street version, called the 427 SC, is capable of accelerating from 0 to 100 miles per hour and braking back to 0 in 13.8 seconds. 30 years later, only a handful of production sports cars have ever bettered that time.
And that's what Carroll's all about.
Well, we've proven that this mustache is not Cobra-proof.
No, I didn't think that would hold on. You don't have enough wax in your whole...
The experience of my life, David. Wow.
Well, it was fun for me.
Wow.
Too. Every time I get in this car, it's an experience.
Heart pounding.
Talk about a thrill and the ride of a lifetime. On this shoot, I had the pleasure of hitting the Louisiana backroads in a 1965 Shelby Daytona Coupe, the first American car to win the World Manufacturers Championship and one of only 6 ever produced. Jim Spiro, the owner of this truly rare vehicle, tells us that this Shelby Daytona was the 3rd car produced and was Carroll Shelby's personal car for approximately 20 years. Hold on tight.
Well, today we've got a special treat. We're at Oak Alley Plantation, about halfway between New Orleans and Baton Rouge, with Jim Spiro. Jim, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here.
And his stunningly beautiful 1965 Shelby Daytona Coupe. This thing is gorgeous, Jim. I've always been a huge fan of these cars.
You and I have a lot in common. I think it's a beautifully beautiful design.
Now, this was like this was the winningest car in '65. This took just about everything, didn't it?
This, in GT class, it was the first U.S. car to win the World Manufacturers Championship, and it cleaned up across the board.
Now, there were only 6 of these built.
Yeah.
And there's 5 of them that are...
One is kind of floating around, and the whereabouts of it are kind of questionable. So for all intents and purposes, there are 5 that are known and out there, and this is one of the 5.
But now this one was actually Carroll Shelby's personal car. Well, I don't mean his daily driver, but it was his car for what,
almost
20 years?
The better part of 20 years, yes. And then I'm grateful enough and fortunate enough to be able to own it now. So it's a treat.
Well, yeah, I'll tell you it's a treat. Now, the other thing that makes you such a unique owner here is you actually use this car. We drove this thing out here about 40 miles.
We did, and I try to drive it regularly. I guess I'm more of a hobbyist rather than a collector. So the pleasure that I derive from owning these cars is from using them and driving them and hearing them.
Well, I truly respect that, and I had the ride of my life, I got to tell you. Now, this was a very controversial design. Pete Brock was the designer of it and
Yes.
took a lot of flack. It almost didn't get out of the shop. One of the things that really, kind of connotes this car is this slab, this dead flat back end. And,
Yes.
and nobody had built anything that ever won that looked like this at the time.
No, they didn't. And it's the car that it really went after was the 250 GTO. And if you look at that, there are some clear differences. And we were talking before the show, but when they initially penned the design, they didn't have this lip spoiler, call it what you will. So at high speeds, the car had a tendency to lift. But once they put that on there, I think all the things fell into place, and that's when they started winning a lot of races.
Oh, and they won a lot in '65. Now, the only thing this car was ever really dinged for was that it was an oven inside.
It was, and it still is.
Can I open it up?
You can indeed.
Well, it is an all-business cockpit. I mean, that's strict race.
Standard race gauges, tach speedometer, and water and oil temperature, pressure, and that's it. No frills even by 65 standards, much less today's standards.
Well, every one of these 6 were hand-built.
Yes.
And so they're all a wee bit different. And they were, reflected some of the character of the builder and also some of the character of the driver. So, to try and address that heating problem, different ducts were put in and all sorts of stuff.
Yes, and what you see here, and here, these are actually functional. Again, it might reduce it from being an oven to a semi-oven, but air will flow through at a reasonable rate of speed and at least give you some hot air going in your face instead of no air. So everything you see is for a purpose, and it all works.
It sure does. Well, this is a 289 engine.
Yes.
Can we open it up and have a look?
We can indeed. Why don't you grab the other side?
We'll do that.
Thank you.
Now, this was amazing because here's a small block car that could run with big blocks all day long and very competitively.
Yes. Light car, aerodynamically very advanced. The advertised horsepower was, I think, around 390 horsepower, and I think this would be right around those specs. And as you said, when you put the whole package together, the aerodynamics, the weight, it can run with just about anything, at least of its day.
It's like it's stuck to the road. I mean, it just seems to just push down, down, down. It's a very rigid car, too. It was really the Cobra chassis, but with a lot of cross bracing and stuff, allegedly to adopt the roof, but it really stiffened the frame an awful lot.
Yes, and you and I were talking earlier. You're obviously a fan of the 427, the 289 Roadster, but this hugs the road much better, and it's a much more aerodynamically advanced ride. No question about it.
We had a blast driving out here, and it's such a rare treat. What do you say we drive it some more?
I say you got yourself a deal.
Hot dog.
Why don't we shut her down and put that little battery switch on?
Got it.
And let's get on the road.
All right. Boy, you don't get in this, you put it on.
Yeah,
it's a lovely fit.
Immediately you welcome yourself to 30 degrees more of temperature.
I had goosebumps just thinking about the history that was made in these cars. Imagine riding in the same vehicle that Bondurant, Grant, and Carroll Shelby himself drove. We zipped down the back roads of Louisiana with Jim's friends behind us in a 427 Comp Cobra. They wanted to tag along for the drive, and what could I say? It was quite a spectacle to see a Daytona Coupe and a 427 Comp Cobra roar down the Bayou asphalt. Let's just say we turned quite a few heads. All too soon, it was time to head back to the plantation to cool off. Man, I experienced firsthand the heat these speed demons generate in the cockpit.
You like that, huh?
Oh, man. Well, Jim, this may rank as the most fun I've ever had with a car, I gotta tell you.
Well, the pleasure was all mine, and the fun is equal on this end.
I gotta tell you, I respect the fact that you drive this. Everybody should drive these cars.
That's my belief.
Let's let it cool and then cruise back to New Orleans. What do
You got
say?
a deal.
Thanks again, man.
Thank you.
Totally awesome.
Without a doubt, the most popular Ford ever produced is the Mustang. I owned a beautiful 69 Mach 1 back in the early 70s. Man, I wish I still had it. But the story of how the Mustang came to be is as interesting as the car itself. In this pocket doc, that's TV jargon for a short documentary, we had a rare opportunity to talk to some of the people who brought the car to life.
There is a different story behind every car that is considered a classic. Some classics are born from the efforts of one dominant individual. Some seem to be the result of a fortunate chain of events. And some come from a small group of people working incredibly hard, who know they have the right idea at the right time. This is the stuff of legends. And this is the story behind the Ford Mustang. A story that begins in the early 1960s.
I think the best way to understand the origin of the Mustang program is to go back to that period of time. And there was an aura around the Ford division of the Ford Motor Company of youth. You had the new president, John F. Kennedy, youngest president any of us had ever seen. We had Lee Iacocca, the youngest VP of Ford. And you had another phenomenon. You had a lot of market research showing up that said that there's going to be an enormous youth movement, with the baby boomers coming out of World War II. As you looked at that, there was a natural, why don't we make youth product that came out of this thing.
The effort to create this youthful product began during the tenure of Robert S. McNamara, general manager of Ford Division in the late 50s. But McNamara would leave Ford in 1961 to become Kennedy's Secretary of Defense, and it would be up to his successor, Lee Iacocca, to work with a few other key individuals at Ford to bring the idea into production.
We knew that we lacked something exciting in the Ford dealerships because we were running on the cars that McNamara had produced, and it's pretty hard to generate a lot of excitement with a Falcon. So we had to do something.
The problems which Iacocca, Fry, and Sperlich initially faced included history itself. The losses the company suffered from the poor sales of the Edsel were still in the minds of upper management, including the company president, Henry Ford II.
There were just a handful of people working on this development. Even once we finally hit the original styling proposal, there probably weren't 25 people in the company working on the program.
Prior to the original production Mustang, the mid-engine two-seat Mustang 1 vehicle was developed by Ford to recruit engineering talent from colleges around the country. But behind the scenes, the car which would go into production was evolving in a different way.
Lee Iacocca was impressed by the public reaction to the Mustang 1, but he knew that the market for two-seater sports cars was pretty limited. But he did believe that there was a market for a four-seater car that could recapture some of the spirit of the original two-seater Thunderbird.
Hal Sperlich came up with the idea that we better see if we can make the car out of the Falcon parts. Now, it wasn't going to look like a Falcon, but the heavy tooling stuff, the engine, the transmission, the driveline, the suspension, turned out the instrument panel actually came out of the Falcon to save all that money. And to this day, most people don't realize that the Mustang is a Falcon, reskinned.
We were having trouble getting a final styling model that we liked. We're going for roadster proportions, long front, short rear, a lot of stance, but still with a good, interior space. So what we did, we set up a competition with 7 teams of stylists who were each going to do a different styling theme off that same basic package. The one that won was the one that Joe Orris ran, which interestingly was called Cougar. It was gorgeous. And it just fit the vision we had for that car perfectly.
By arguing cost savings from using the Falcon as a derivative model, and armed with a magnificent Oros design, the team was able to get approval from upper management to proceed.
I ran into Henry Ford that day. And Henry Ford came up to me and says, "I'm tired of your damn Mustang. I'm going to approve. I'm tired of hearing about it. I'm going to approve it this afternoon."
The day the thing was approved, by the company, Henry Ford approved the program. I felt, fantastically, but I also felt a huge burden.
I remember walking out of the meeting and our cook says, "It's approved. I want to introduce it to World's Fair." I said, "When's that?" He said, April 1964. I said, that's 18 months from now. We'd never done a car in 18 months in our lives, more like 36 to 40 months. He says, I don't care. I want to introduce it to the World's Fair.
As part of the team's proposal, they estimated that roughly 84,000 units would need to be sold in the first year of production in order for Ford to break even. Yet there was a sense among the group that they were sitting on something special. So Iacocca took steps to make sure that Ford would be able to meet demand if the car's appeal took off.
We started out to get the car tooled and in production in one assembly plant, which is Dearborn, and we got $40 million. It's nothing, peanuts. Iacocca said, this is a hit, so let's get. He went and sold the company on a second assembly plant, which turned out to be San Jose, California, to feed the West Coast.
The 1964 World's Fair came, and so did the introduction of the Mustang. The team had met its production deadline, and dealers couldn't keep them in stock.
When we had the styling that became the final styling for the car, when we had numbers that showed us we could price it at an attractive price, I was convinced at that point this car would be very successful. Nobody, including God himself, knew this car would reach those levels of volumes, sell over 400,000 cars in the first year.
We made more money on that car. The average price with all the options on it was pushing $3,000. Unbelievably profitable.
The success of the Mustang was the result of marketing as well as design and low production costs. Iacocca employed a number of new techniques hyping the car's appeal. He convinced the owner of Tiffany's to create an award just for Mustang. Through Fry, he provided 50 of the top automotive writers in the country with a prototype to drive before the car's introduction. And it was one of the first designs directly marketed to women.
It was probably the best marketing program I've ever seen. In fact, if you think about the original ad, it was a gorgeous, picture, and the words just said, the new Mustang, 2368, and that was all you had to say.
I was a victim of the marketing campaign and advertising campaign that they had. They started running TV commercials with horses running across the screen, coming April 17th, the unexpected.
I think the Mustang came along at a perfect time, and it invented a market. The so-called pony cars are in fact named after the Mustang.
As a testament to the popularity of that original car, the title Mustang has remained as a nameplate for over 30 years. The fact that it has attained the status of legend is also a testament to the vision and timing of that original group of people.
There's very little accomplished by one man sitting at his desk having brilliant ideas. Good ideas generally come out of an interaction among people, and it was that way with the Mustang.
We traveled to the middle of Wisconsin to visit Mr. Mustang himself, Bob Perkins. Bob is an authority on Mustangs and has one of the largest selections of NOS Mustang parts in the country. Bob has restored Mustangs for several high-end collectors and celebrities, but his biggest claim to fame is his collection of original, low-mileage, unrestored Mustangs. I got to admit, I was more than a little jealous of his collection. Hey, we're in Juneau, Wisconsin with Bob Perkins of Perkins Restoration. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dennis.
Bob's got the most amazing collection of original unrestored Mustangs on the planet. We're going to show you around here today, starting with this, which is the lowest mileage car in the shop, 2.8 miles on this 73 convertible.
That's right. This car was bought new 1973 by a Ford dealership up in Bloomer, Wisconsin.
But not even dealer prepped.
No, they knew this was the last year of the Mustang convertible, so they put it up. Don Nielsen knew what he was going to do.
2.8 miles. But this 73 Mach is the one that actually got you started in the whole area of collecting original unrestored.
Right. I bought this in 1981 from Jackie Jones, a good friend of mine, and this was the first unrestored brand new Mustang I had a chance to buy.
351 Cobra jet?
That's correct.
And pretty much won everything it could.
It has 4,400 original miles, and it's the only Mustang that I'm aware of in the Mustang Club of America that has won the restored, the unrestored, and the thoroughbred class as an unrestored Mustang.
But I love this Showroom Fresh 66. This is just a sweet little car.
Yeah, this is an excellent example of the first generation Mustang. It's basically a brand new car. It has 2,000 original miles.
2,000. Now how about this 71 Boss 351? How many miles?
2,800.
2,800, and a very rare car, made only 1 year.
That's right, and it was a unique car, and the motor special with the Boss option on it.
Like solid lifters and all the performance goodies.
Right.
But everybody's favorite, the 70 Boss 302.
This is definitely my favorite car. 1,500 original miles, mostly original paint. We've done a little detailing on it, but it's a brand new car.
And the color is just kind of the classic Boss color.
Well, that was Ford's team color for 1970.
But the granddaddy of all Mustang muscle, the Boss 429. This thing is killer.
The Boss 429 is probably the ultimate Ford muscle car, and if you take it to a car show, they definitely draw a crowd.
They swarm around it. How many miles?
8,200 original miles.
But never been even detailed.
No, this is a totally original car, never been painted on or detailed.
And you were telling me that actually this isn't just a Mustang with a 429 slammed in it. It's a special car from the firewall forward.
That's right. It's a unique unibody from the firewall forward, including all the suspension.
But I like this one down here. This is a real sleeper. Plain Jane 70 Fastback. With the hood down, you'd think it was a six-banger.
That's right. It looks like a six-banger, but under the hood there's a 428 Super Cobra jet.
Again, with all the drag goodies?
And some extras, like the dual quad intake that was sold over the counter to give you more added performance.
Man, how many miles?
6,000 original miles.
Wow, comes off the line pretty quick though, I'll bet.
Very quick.
Very quick. Well, now the car's are only part of the store. You've got an incredible collection of dealership memorabilia, parts, and all that stuff. Let's go have a look at some of that.
Sounds good.
All right.
Bob doesn't just collect Mustangs. Oh no, he collects practically anything associated with Mustangs. Bob had enough memorabilia to recreate a late 60s dealership parts department and service center. He literally had a museum-quality exhibit. The longer I was in Bob's shop, the further back in time I felt myself traveling.
But Bob, this is a personal favorite from my high school days. A 66 2+2 Fastback 289. Gorgeous car. How many miles?
4,000.
Ooh, I don't think I was in one with only 4,000 back in 66, but would you mind putting a few more on?
We'll put a couple on.
All right, let's do it. Man, it even smells new. Fires right up.
Setting in the front seat of this 66 Fastback, I felt like I was right back in high school. Warm afternoons, my favorite tunes on the radio, and not a care in the world. I even felt younger. Life is good.
Well, and you've become kind of the Mustang guy,
Well,
more or less.
yeah, I guess I got in it at the right time and kind of had a different goal in what I was collecting and the way I was restoring cars were, we wanted to make the cars 100% authentic, not a resto mod or anything like that. So it's kind of a small clientele, but it's, a good one to be in.
It's also a growing clientele, actually. People are turning away from these over-restorations.
Right. I tend to call the over-restorations as incorrect restorations, and when people talk about paint jobs with no orange peel, that's being over-restored, and I look at it as being incorrectly restored. And
Bob, it was great. It was awesome. It was a step back in time. Man, you made my day. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for coming.
Oh, so what do you say? Now we take out the Boss 429?
Next time.
Next time. Oh, please.
Maybe the white Cobra jet.
Ooh, I like that too.
Our next car is a dream come true for Jeff Berge, who always wanted a GT Mustang. This beautiful white 65 GT Mustang Hypo convertible came with a nice array of image and performance pieces, but it's the high performance option that provides the muscle. At the time, the 271 horsepower Hypo 289 was the hottest Mustang around.
Well, today we got a beautiful morning in White Lake, Michigan with Jeff Berge. Jeff, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And Jeff's gorgeous 65 Mustang GT Hypo. This convertible is gorgeous, Jeff.
Thank you. It's a very rare car with the high performance engine and the GT package.
Yeah, it really is. Well, I'd like to do a kind of a tail to tip tour
Sure.
of a Hypo GT. Now, one of the first things you notice if you're coming up behind it is the trumpet exhaust.
Yes. Now these are not really specific to the Hypo. That's part of the GT package. All of the 4-barrel Mustangs had dual exhaust, but if you had a standard engine or without the GT package, they would turn down below the valence.
And
with the GT package, they come through.
And I got to believe it makes it sound a little bit.
It gives a little rumble to it.
Well, you've also got the striping and the GT badging, and that was all specific to the GT package
yes,
too?
These stripes are part of the GT package. The base car typically had a little chrome ornament on the quarter panel, or sometimes they would have a pinstripe that wrapped around there with a rocker panel molding. The GT alone had this stripe package and the badges.
I see. And you've got the pony interior, always a nice option.
Yes, this is technically the interior decor option, which would get you the ponies on the seats, the wood grain on the dash, the wood steering wheel, trim rings around the brake pedal and gas pedal.
Now you got a rally
yes,
Gage package there,
I've
right?
added a rally pack to this car, which was optional in 65 and 66.
And you got an 8,000 RPM tack too.
Yes, that's the correct tachometer if you have the high-performance engine. The other V8s would have a 6,000 RPM tachometer.
Oh, okay. Now you've also got a pretty rare radio in there, don't you?
I upgraded that radio. That is actually a 1966 Mustang radio. It's an AM/FM mono radio.
Ooh, cruising in style in that
yes.
day, right? But it's also an automatic car, and I didn't know there were GT automatics.
Well, there were very
automatics
few
actually.
hypo-automatics. Yeah. A lot of people believe there were none, but I have been researching Mustangs for 30-some years, and I actually found a couple of cars that were original hypo-automatics. This car I converted. I have a bad leg, so I had to do that. But I've got a friend in Florida who has a transmission shop, and he built me a transmission that has all the parts, the correct parts to be a hypo-type transmission.
Well, I bet it scoots too.
Oh, yes.
Now, some other things for the GT package that set it off were these front fog lights, right?
Yes, the car had, with the GT package, you get the fog lights and the trumpets. You get a 5-gauge instrument cluster that gave you a full instrumentation as opposed to the regular Mustang that just had what they commonly call idiot lights.
Right, right. Now that Gage package became standard.
That was standard in 66, then they all had that. And they converted cars to an alternator instead of a generator. There are a few other upgrades between 64.5, 65, and 66.
Well, let's look under the hood at this hypo.
Sure.
Wow. Now all that chrome would have been standard?
With the hypo, you get this engine dress-up package. The chrome valve covers, low restriction air cleaner with a chrome top. On the standard engine, they would be black like this with gold-colored valve covers and an air cleaner with a snorkel on it.
But with the hypo and the dress-up, you'd come in chrome, huh?
Right. Now this hypo engine has a lot of other features. It's a unique block with heavy-duty main caps. It has a selected crankshaft, a solid lifter camshaft in it, forged pistons. It's got better connecting rods than the base engine, free-flowing exhaust system, a larger carburetor than the base car.
So it's just a very beefy engine.
Yes, it's rated at 271 horsepower. The other 4-barrel engine in the Mustang is rated at 225 horsepower, and the base V8 was a 200 horsepower 2-barrel.
Well, now this was basically the engine they put into the Cobras, wasn't it?
Yes, this is basically the same car that Shelby used in the Cobra and the Shelby GT350. Now in those cars, Shelby would add aluminum intake manifold, a larger Holly carburetor, and tubular headers, and upgrade it to 306 horsepower.
Now you got some extra bracing here.
Yes, I've added some Shelby bracing. This is called a Monte Carlo bar. This is an export brace. And Shelby did that so that under racing conditions and flexing, the body would not flex or twist.
Now you actually, you drive this thing, right?
Oh yes, the car was restored 20 years ago. I bought it from a fellow in a Shelby club, and I've done nothing to it really but add the radio and the Gage pack and polish it.
Oh.
took good care of it.
Well, what do you say we take it out and give it some air?
Be my pleasure.
Oh yes. You know, this was one of the cars I wanted in high school. Just couldn't have it.
My dad bought one similar to this in 1965, so it brings back a lot of memories for me.
Oh yeah.
Every time I turn this key, I feel 30 years younger.
Oh, me too. Gosh. Now, how long have you had it, actually?
I've had this car about 5 years. I dreamt about it for 35 years, so about 5 years ago I was able to fulfill a dream to have a hypo Mustang convertible that was in nice condition.
This is by no means the first Mustang you've had, Jeff.
I've had a couple dozen Mustangs over the years. A little bit of everything. A Boss 351, several Shelbys, Mustang 2, 67 Mustang. I like them all.
But it sounds like you're kind of a Ford guy.
Oh yes, I've worked at Ford for 30 years. I've always been a car nut and a Ford enthusiast. Born and raised in Ohio, moved up here to work for Ford, and just grew to love the scenery. You know, we've got some beautiful areas up here. I don't care much for winter because I have to put my babies away for the winter.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, but they probably need a rest anyway. So you did some fairly extensive suspension work on this too, didn't you, Jeff?
Yes, I've upgraded the suspension system basically to everything that was on a Shelby GT350.
Wow.
I've increased the front sway bar to the 1-inch sway bar. I've lowered the upper control arms. I put the Coney shocks all the way around, the quick steering arms to change the steering ratio, and added the larger brakes on the back. So it's basically a GT350 suspension-wise.
So it was like cool to begin with, and you just made it cooler.
Yes.
Oh, Jeff, this thing is a time machine. I still feel 30 years younger. Does this feeling last?
Yes, it does.
Oh, good, good. Now, if I need a recharge, though, I can come back. They'll take me out.
You're
again.
certainly welcome to do that.
Thanks a lot. Beautiful car, Jeff. Beautiful.
Thanks.
As I mentioned earlier, I owned a 69 Mach 1 many years ago. I love the lines of the 69 and 70 Mach 1s. As you can imagine, we had many great examples of Mach 1s to choose from, but we chose an award-winning car in the Midwest that we felt represented the dream Mach 1. And of course, it was packing a powerful 428 big block. We're in New Albany, Indiana today with Larry Weiss. Larry, welcome to the show.
Oh, Dennis, thank you very much.
And this gorgeous 70 Mach 1.
Thank you, thank you.
Now, Larry, you know a fair amount about these things, is that right?
Well, I'm an MCA Mustang Club of America Gold Card judge for the 69-70 Mustangs, and I attend the shows. I judge the trailered cars, which mine, of course, is driven, and you know, just help out people, questions, things like that. Try to give them some pointers on improving the car in the hobby.
Great. Well, now I've actually had one of these. I had a 69 Mach 1 just out of high school. Yeah. So let's, you can help me with some of the pointers too.
I'd be glad to.
Let's talk about the differences, because they were really the same body, but trim differences,
just
right?
Very subtle changes.
So we'll do a tail to tip here.
That'll work. You've got a honeycomb tail light panel that was exclusive to 70. 69 was just body color. 70, the tail lights go in, concave. 69, they came out convex.
And you've got these rectangular exhaust tips?
Yes, those are exclusive only to the 4-barrel cars in 1970.
And that would have been standard, though?
Yes, on any of the 4-barrel cars.
But these would have been options?
The rear spoiler, the slats are optional. Right, pay a little more money for that.
Now, the other thing that's different is that I guess when Larry Shinoda came over, he said, let's get rid of the bric-a-brac, right?
Right. 69, he's coming to town.
So they cleaned up the 70 Mach 1. They took off the Mustang insignia here.
Right, the chrome with the black medallion in the center of the Mustang and the fake rear quarter scoop, that left.
And we had a gold stripe that said Mach 1 in 69, which was replaced in 70 with...
just kind of a dye aluminum trim on the bottom panel that said Mach 1.
Hard to miss that.
Yeah, it's there.
Now, this is Calypso Coral, is that right?
Yes, if you were a Shelby owner in 70, it was Competition Orange.
But if it was a Mach 1, it was Calypso Coral.
Calypso Coral.
It looks real similar, though, doesn't it?
I think it is.
Now, the interiors were pretty similar between 69 and 70.
Yeah, just a few distinctions. In any of the 4-speed cars in 70, you had a Hurst shifter as opposed to the Ford shifter in 69. And most notably, 70 was the first year of the locking steering wheel with the ignition relocated on the steering column. 69 and all years back were on the dash. Rim blow steering wheel.
I always loved that.
It
that
works.
was so cool. Well, the hood was different too. Because in 69 it was all flat black.
Right.
And in 70 we went with just the black stripe here, and then these black tape stripes with the engine designation, and that looks like a 428 to me.
Make no mistake, Dennis, it is a 428.
The big bad 428.
Yes, right.
The front end in a 70 was back down to single headlights on each side.
Yes, that's correct.
Because the 69 had duals.
Yeah, it was kind of just a one-year thing where they did the 4 headlights.
These twist locks were 70?
Yes, 70 went to a twist lock to keep that hood down on them hard powers.
Well, let's twist them and have a look at this 428 monster. Oh, that's clean.
Yes, thank you.
That really is beautiful. Now, this was the last year for the 428 in the Mustang, and actually in all cars.
Yeah, in the passenger cars, 70 was it for the FE engines, which the 428 is.
What did they rate this engine at?
The factory rating was 335 horse.
Yeah, wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Sure,
right?
sure.
Now, there were a few other differences under the hood here.
Yes.
70 had a rev limiter, is that true?
Ford brought the big brother along in 1970. They put a little electronic nanny on in 1970. about 5,800 RPMs. It would send a signal to the coil, and essentially it disrupt the firing order.
Stop that, right?
Yeah, right. Well, because what would happen was a lot of people take them off, blow the engine, and then Ford wouldn't pay the warranty because they tampered.
Now this is a concourse-driven car.
Yes, this is not to be confused with a trailer queen.
It's
okay?
a garage queen.
It's a garage queen.
But you drive it.
I drive it.
I love it.
If
I
I get in the
respect that.
rain, I drive it. I got a little sticker. If you see this car on a trailer, it's
Been
stolen.
Now, is it otherwise, though, concourse accurate?
For the purist, there's one notable distinction. The wheels are the 14-inch Magnum 500s, which are totally wrong.
But everybody's got them.
Yeah, it's kind of an accepted by now. It's just got the look, so you have to make some concession to originality for yourself.
Well, concourse driven, let's drive it.
Let's do it.
All right. Now, how many colors were available in 70?
You know what? For some reason, I want to say 16. I have seen one or two that actually had a vermilion interior, which is kind of a blood red orange.
Ooh. With this color?
With this car, exterior color, I mean, it's like forever stuck in the 70s.
Brady Bunch.
Brady Bunch. I mean, you're there and you're not going anywhere. You're stuck in the 70s in that car.
Now, does this car look as fine underneath as it does above?
Better, Dennis.
No.
Better.
I'll have to crawl under there later.
And I'm not at all unbiased at all, I'll tell you that either. Because, you know, I tell you, for about every hour I spend up top, I probably spend 3 or 4 hours underneath.
I always found it odd that they had the clock over on my side. It's great. It gives me something to do.
It gives you something to do.
But you really have no clue what time it is.
No. And if I did, I'd hit one of these trees and kill a bear or something.
Oh, Larry, this has been a blast. It makes me want mine back.
Great. Well, Dennis, there's one thing we haven't done yet.
What would that be?
We haven't smoked them yet. Do we have time?
Larry, we always have time for that. No, don't kill the host.
I won't. I'll do my best.
Now this next car is truly the boss of street cars. The 1969 Boss 429 Mustang. We found this beautiful example in Ohio. I'd forgotten how wild these cars were, with a NASCAR 429 stuffed under the hood and an excellent power-to-weight ratio. When we started looking for a Boss 429 to feature on the show, we really had no idea how hard it would be to find an excellent example and an owner who was willing to drive it. Many owners don't drive their cars and some don't even start the engines. The cars have become that valuable. But then we contacted Greg Montgomery, the owner of this beautiful red Boss 429. Greg is the son of legendary drag racer Ohio George Montgomery, and he grew up watching his father race. Some of you will remember that Ohio George campaigned a fiberglass 69 Mustang powered by a twin turbocharged Boss 429 engine that was known as the Mr. Gasket Gasser. When Greg restored his Boss 429, NOS parts, such as Boss cylinder heads left over from the 69 season, helped create a near-perfect restoration. I asked Greg to show me his Boss 429 during a trip to Ohio last summer.
Now, I understand these cars actually started out as Mach 1s.
That's correct. All the cars were made in Dearborn assembly line with 428s, and they were shipped to Carcraft to have the modifications done.
And they were R-code Mach 1s. What's an R-code?
It has the 31 spline axles, the Detroit locker rear end with a nodular case, and also the external oil cooler in front of the radiator.
So, now, from an interior standpoint, though, they're really a standard Mach 1 interior with any of the Mach 1 designations removed. Is there any other differences?
That's correct, Dennis. The only differences that are in there are the knobs underneath the dash that control the choke, the manual choke, and also a knob to control the air flapper valve and the hood scoop.
Well, that's right. This scoop is truly functional. So many of them in that day were just dummy scoops, but this one's manually controlled.
That's correct. In fact, I'd like to demonstrate.
Oh, I'd love to see it. Oh, yeah. So you can manually close it when it rains and open it up when you're running.
Yes.
Now, other than that, there weren't too many things like the 302. You didn't have any of the Larry Shinoda striping. In fact, about all you had was this 429 decal.
Yeah, they kept the flashiness on this car to a very minimum. And that's one decal on each fender.
And that's about it.
That's it.
Of course, then the big thing about this car, and it is a big thing, is in fact the Boss 429 engine. Let's have a look at that.
Okay.
Now, that's about as packed in an engine compartment as you'll ever see an engine.
That's correct.
There had to be some major surgery go on to get this in here.
Yeah, actually, the engine is 31 inches wide, and before any modifications were done, they only had 29 inches to work with. So they had to do a lot of modifications to get the engine to fit, such as moving the shock towers outward on both sides, specially constructed inner fender panels, and upper control arms on the suspension are all fabricated to assist this motors.
Now, moving the shock towers out also moved the front wheels out?
Yes, it did. In fact, the front wheels have almost an inch wider track than the rear wheels.
And I've got to believe the springs are a lot heftier.
Yes, they are.
Because this is a massive engine, and most of the weight of this car, or a lot of it, sits up here in front.
Yeah, close to 55% is over the front axle.
Now, the 429 engine, huge, gorgeous, but they actually had a couple different ones that they put in to begin with. The early ones came out with what were called an S-code engine.
That's correct. They had the heavier NASCAR connecting rods and several internal modifications that were different, but the easiest way to tell is the early cars, the first 230, had magnesium valve covers, whereas these are aluminum.
And this would be a T-code engine.
This is a T-code. This is a June 69 date car, so it would have the aluminum.
And it went on to be the engine they put in the 1970 Boss 429.
That's correct.
Now, the thing that's conspicuously absent here from most cars is the battery. There is no battery here.
No.
And for obvious reasons, space constraints, for one, it was put, in fact, in the trunk in the 429. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, other than the space reasons, was there any other reason they dropped it back here?
Well, with so much weight over the front axle, they needed to get the weight to the rear, and this was one way of helping that.
And those are pretty large batteries in that day.
It had a 9-foot long cable that ran directly to the front solenoid.
Now, this was also, you have a space saver spare.
That's correct. It was the first Mustang to make the space saver spare standard, and the reason for that is the tires and wheels are so large it would took up all usable space in the trunk.
Well, Greg, you've done a fabulous job. This is a meticulous restoration and a real preservation of a piece of muscle car history. Greg's Boss had not been driven since the restoration was completed several weeks before. In fact, he had no plans to drive the car until we contacted him.
I love this car. I want this car.
Greg lives not far from the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, and an old runway made a great location to bring the Boss back to life. Now, is that a glass scoop on there?
Yeah, it's fiberglass. They had trouble keeping the paint on the scoops in 69 and 70. They made them all black.
When our drive was over, I noticed that unmistakable gleam in the eye of a young boy who was finally driving the car he'd always dreamed of. On one of our jaunts down to Florida, we had a chance to track down a mythical snake we'd heard about for years. It's a special Shelby Mustang called the Super Snake, and it's the only factory 427 Shelby Mustang ever produced. The history of this beast is a little cloudy to say the least, but one thing for sure, this Shelby spits a lot of venom. In 1967, Carroll Shelby was a household name, and his Shelby Mustangs were setting new performance standards. But Carroll had a special project he was working on, a special Mustang, the mysterious 427-powered Super Snake. Don McCain was a former Shelby sales manager and worked at Melbourne's Ford in Los Angeles.
Well, we let the cat out of the bag after almost 30 years. We were approached by Shelby American, and I'm not going to say by whom, to build this car. They wanted to build it as a market study. Could we sell a 427 Mustang in lieu of the boat anchor 428s that they were putting in the GT500s?
Now here comes some of the mystery. Fred Goodell was chief engineer at Shelby. He'd been sent over from Ford to help Shelby mass-produce the Mustangs.
And Carroll had a curious way of doing things. One day he called me on the telephone and he says, "You know, I'm the California distributor for Goodyear tires. And Goodyear have asked me to do a promotion on a new tire called the Thunderbird. And I would like you to build a special GT500 with a 427 racing engine and a special rear axle, whatever you say the car needs, that we can take to San Angelo, Texas on their test track and run a high-speed run for 500 miles. And so I selected a white GT500 and we rebuilt it with a 427 racing engine, lightweight racing engine, special rear axle, special transmission, and of course Thunderbolt tires.
Oh, that was the mother of all 427s at that time. That car had aluminum heads on it, aluminum water pump, forged crank, Le Mans rods. Just everything basically inside the engine was built to run a sustained 6,000 RPM to race Le Mans.
When the Super Snake was completed, it was shipped to Texas for the Thunderbolt tire test.
So we went over to San Angelo and we met Carroll, and Carroll took some of the news people. I remember the editor of Time magazine was one of them, and the editor of Life was another one that he took out and gave him a run on the test track with his car. And then he came back and he handed me his helmet and he says, "I got to go to Washington, so you go ahead and drive the test." And so I got back in the car and I drove the car for a 500-mile test. And we drove at 142 miles an hour for 500 miles, 142 average for 500 miles.
From Texas, the car went to Don McCain at Melbourne's Ford so it could be sold. But with the high sticker price, it took over a year to move it off the showroom floor.
We planned on building 50 of these cars, but they weren't going to be the Le Mans engines. That was really a pricey engine, and you know, for $79.95 there are other things on the market that were a little more palatable.
The Super Snake at Melbourne's Ford eventually sold to two airline pilots who raced it on weekends. It exchanged hands several more times and eventually landed here in Florida. Glass hood like all Shelbys. Wow.
She's crammed in there pretty tight. If you'll notice the oil cooling system, this was all original back in '67.
But it's an official side oiler 427, about 5.
It was rated at about 580 horsepower at the flywheel and about 340, 350, I believe. Don't quote me on those numbers at the rear wheels.
So David, the interior on this is basic standard Shelby, regular GT500, right?
Standard Shelby interior. The seat belts have the insignia on them. It's got the standard roll bar, which is padded, and it's got the retractable harnesses, shoulder harnesses.
Yeah, nice with this amount of power. We got the 3 stripes that come all the way across the car, but the rest of the markings, like the Cobra on the side and all that, it still just indicates...
It pretty much has the initial markings that all the Shelby cars had. It had the extra front clip and the extra rear with the special lights and the bowed bumper. The only real distinguishing factor on this particular car, again, is the 3 stripes. Now, one of the things that's kind of interesting is back then when Carroll was building the cars, they had these high driving lights in the grille. Some were called outside lights, some were inside.
Right.
This particular car had outside lights.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, having driven on some tracks like this in the past by myself mostly, it's a whole different ballgame when you got 40 other guys who want to be in the same place that you want to be.
Dennis, if I knew that car was going to be what it is today, and as many articles have been written about this car in the Shelby American Automobile Club magazines, Drag Strip, Mustang Monthly, Auto Week, it's one heck of an automobile. I wish I still had it.
In November 1969, Richard Markarian went to the local Ford dealer and picked up his brand new 1970 Ford Torino CJ. The price, tax and license included, was $4,300. As time went by, though, the Torino became the grocery getter/family car, and in 1976, after 116,000 miles, Richard decided to give it a rest. The old Ford was parked and stored in barns until 1990, when Richard began a 2-year ground-up restoration. Man, when I saw the car, it took me back to my college days. Well, today we're in Fresno County, California, the raisin capital of the world, with Richard Markarian. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thanks for coming, Dennis.
And this gorgeous 70 Torino Cobra Jet. This is a beautiful car. This was Motor Trend's Car of the Year in 1970, and you bought this baby brand new.
Yeah, you're right, Dennis. In August of 1969, we sat down and placed an order and got it delivered in November.
So, I mean, you spec'd this thing out. You ordered this baby from the factory, right?
That's right, Dennis.
Man, and you had this in high school?
Drove it to high school and then college and got
You were
married.
living right. You were living right. But you've loaded this thing up when you ordered it with just about every option you could put on it. I mean, you got power windows, you got the ribbon tack.
Yeah, we rim-blown steering wheel, bucket seats, C6 transmission, air conditioning.
I mean, it was loaded. But you were telling me you actually ordered a Super Cobra Jet and couldn't have it the way you wanted it, right?
Yeah, originally placed the order as a Super Cobra Jet 4-speed with a drag pack with air conditioning. Ford Motor Company denied it, sent it back and said you have to have one or the other. You can't have a 4-speed and a drag pack with air conditioning. So I decided to get the air.
Well, out here I think that was a smart move.
110 in the summer, you bet.
Well, now the 429, this wasn't the Boss engine, but it also wasn't the 428, right?
That's right. They made 4 versions of the 429, 4 performance versions of the 429.
Let's open her up.
Okay.
And this would have been the Cobra Jet. There was a base 429, right?
Yeah, it was called a Thunder Jet. That was the standard motor. If you ordered a Cobra, that would be the standard motor, 360 horsepower, 429 called a Thunder Jet.
And then this was the Cobra Jet at, what did you say, 360 or so?
This had 370. The Cobra Jet had 370 horse, and then the Super had 375 horse, a little variation of it.
Now the Boss 429 engine, which is different heads, wasn't available in this car.
Right. The Boss 429 was only available in the Mustang.
Now you kind of turned this into a semi-Super Cobra Jet, didn't you, when you rebuilt it?
When we went through the engine to freshen everything up, I wanted that sound of that solid lifter clatter. Exactly. We wanted that sound, so I found an NOS Super Cobra Jet cam, rebuilt the engine back with the stock compression, everything brand new, but put the Super Cobra Jet cam in it.
But this was your grocery getter car. You put 116,000 miles on it before you restored it. In fact, you have a Boss 429, and you used this as a tow car when you took that to the drag strip.
That's right. This car was the tow car for the Boss. Was 2 years old when we got the Boss 429, and then my wife drove this car and I drove the Boss 429 and drag raced it, and this towed the Boss to the drags.
Wow. Well, does she run like she did back in 70?
Well, let's find out.
Well, what are you saying? The older you get, the faster they run?
Yeah, it seems like that. The older you get, the quicker they are.
Well, let's check it out. Oh yeah, it sounds great. Well, I've always been a little bit fuzzy on this, Richard. Fairlane, Torino. This car doesn't help me because it really doesn't say anywhere what it is. There's Fairlane on the radio, but it's a Torino.
Yeah, in late '69, Ford introduced the name Torino, and the way I understand it, Torino was a town in Italy that one of Henry Ford's wives came from. And Torino and Fairlane were both being used in late 1969. Later, the Torino was the only name being used, but the way I understood it is the Torino was the higher optioned end car, more standard equipment, and the Fairlane was kind of if you wanted it, you had to order it.
Oh, Richard, I've always liked that shaker hood. That thing looks menacing, doesn't it?
Yeah, the shaker, the ram air on these Cobra Jet cars was a really neat option to have. It really made them look wicked.
Oh yeah, yeah. Like I say, it looks serious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it was functional too. That's it's not just for looks. It's actually functional. When you mash the throttle and go to full throttle, there's a door that flops open, and you're bypassing the snorkel. Mm-hmm. And the cold air comes directly into the shaker, so it is functional.
Richard, what a beautiful piece of American muscle. Thanks a lot, man.
It was great having you, Dennis.
Hey, it is a gorgeous day. What do you say we go around one more time?
Let's take her for a ride.
I've always loved the original Thunderbird. The car has a classic style that still looks great today. Over the years, I've seen thousands of them,
but I always have to stop and take in the beauty of these cars. So when I headed to Texas to meet Amos Minter, a recognized two-seat bird expert and restorer, I knew I was in for sensory overload. And boy, was I right.
We're in the great state of Texas, Dallas to be exact, today with Amos Minter. Amos, welcome to the show.
Thanks.
Amos, I've never been surrounded by so many two-seat birds. Now, you've been collecting, restoring, and dealing in these for how long?
28 years.
That's a while, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Well, this one caught my eye. What's this color?
This is Golden Glow Yellow. It's a very rare color in 56, and this car is fully optioned with all the power toys.
Well, you got a lot of different colors here, too.
Yeah.
You got a beautiful red
Torch
57,
red.
torch red. Now, this one's interesting. 56, what is that color?
This is Sage Green. This is a very unique color, only used in 56 and only on the T-Bird in 56.
You had another name for that green.
No Sail Green. Ford many times calls it Thunderbird Green in 56.
Uh-huh. And it was only 56 they used
only
that color.
Only 56 that had that color. It's a unique color.
Now, that's another unique
This
color
is
right
a
there.
unique color. I've only owned 3 of these in my life. It is a Navajo Gray 56 with a Fiesta and white interior. It came in with the original paint into our shop, and it's an outstanding example of a Navajo Gray car.
It is beautiful. Now, you say you've owned 3 of these. How many T-Birds have you handled over the years?
In the vicinity of between 17 and 1,800 at this point.
That is unbelievable.
Several of them we've had back again, so they're getting counted 2 and 3 times when they come back.
Well, there's one in particular I want to have a close-up look at. You've got another torch red with a removable hardtop.
Yes.
Well, let's go have a look at that baby.
Good.
Well, Amos, this is a gorgeous car.
Thanks.
Now, there's some distinctive features on the 57. One is, of course, the fins that the 56 didn't have in the same way, and it's longer.
Yes, in 57.
And there's no Continental kit.
Not from the factory.
You could get it aftermarket,
yes,
but that's the first year without the Continental kit.
Uh-huh.
Removable hardtop.
Yes.
And there are a number of different options here, too.
Right, convertible tops, tonneau tops. The way you wanted it was the way Ford wanted to sell you the car.
And actually, the porthole was standard, and you had to special order the no porthole.
Yes, in 57.
Now, beautiful interior on these cars.
Thank you. This car has a custom all-leather interior. Everything is done in the original styles. Everything is all leather with the exception of the door panels, kick panels, and dash.
And you couldn't get that in 57 unless you knew somebody.
Technically, no, you couldn't do it from the factory, and this is a special order for a customer of ours.
I've always loved the instrumentation on this car, too. Let's pop the hood and look underneath, though.
Okay.
Now, this is a D-code car, a 312 V8.
245 horsepower, 4-barrel car.
And D-code meant it was a single 4-barrel.
Yes.
There was the E-code, which was a dual 4-barrel.
With 285 horsepower.
And an F-code, which was supercharged.
Yes, sir. Could have up to 300 horsepower.
Yeah, that was a lot in 57.
A lot of power.
Well, I'll tell you, Amos, we're in your shop, and you got a rack over there. Let's put it up and look underneath.
I'd like to.
I'll let you close the hood.
Okay.
Well, she looks pretty nice underneath, too, Amos.
Correct. Well, all 55 through the 57s have the X-Cell member in the center of the frame, the same thing as the full-size Ford Convertible and early Corvettes of their day. The air shocks is an aftermarket add-on. A 57 will have a red oxide rear end chunk that will be different from the 55 and 56 models. Everything under here is all original and all stock with the exception of the air shocks.
Well, it looks fine. Let's take it down and take it for a spin.
Great.
Amos asked if I'd like to drive, and believe me, he didn't have to ask twice. Even though I've owned several 60s T-Birds, I've never had a chance to climb behind the wheel of a two-seater. Amos's love for these classic Thunderbirds shows in the quality of his restorations. The workmanship is flawless. This 57 drove better than when it was new. Amos remembers the passion he had for these cars as a young boy. He used to stop by the local Ford dealer almost every day and stare at the two-seater in the showroom.
The Ford dealer finally came out and said, "Son, I will give you the little plastic model if you'll promise to not come back until you're old enough to buy a car."
Amos, you made my day. I've never driven one of these.
Great. I'm glad
Thanks so much for joining us on the show, Amos.
Our
It was a
pleasure to have you. Thanks.
Beautiful birds.
The Thunderbird was never meant to be labeled a sports car, but in 1956, Ford found the T-Bird being pitted against the Corvette in competitive events, and the Vet was beating the T-Bird regularly. As a result, in 1957, Ford Motor Company prepared for battle and built 2 special Thunderbirds for racing. Join me as we get an up-close look at this very rare Battlebird.
Well, here we are today at Thunderhill Park Raceway in Willows, California. If you hear some race cars in the background, there's a reason for that. I'm with Bo Cheadle, the owner of this piece of Ford racing history. Bo, welcome. And Gil Baumgartner, the restorer. This is a pretty rare bird. Bo, it's the Battlebird. Tell me about this baby.
Well, it's one of 2 Ford factory race cars that Ford built in 1957, and the other one's been destroyed, so this is the only one left in the world. And the car went 205 miles an hour at Daytona Beach in 1957. One way, it couldn't duplicate the run because it overheated, so that didn't go in the record book, but it was in all the media that it went 205 on these skinny little tires, which is faster than I would like to drive it.
I hear you. Now, I can't imagine it looked this way when you bought it. You brought Gil in to make it look this way, is that right?
Right. Gil is an old friend of mine and is the authenticity chairman of the National Thunderbird Club, Classic Thunderbird Club International. Gil worked his magic on the car after doing a lot of heavy research so that we did the car back exactly the way it was.
Well, now, under the hood here, Gil, it started out with a Ford 312, but what's under there?
Well, it's a 348, and of course it's highly modified with fuel injectors. Externally, it still looks like a 312, except for the headers, fuel injectors, and the magneta. Internally, of course, it's a lot different, and the horsepower is a lot different. But when we got it, of course, we didn't have the injectors, we didn't have the magneta, we didn't have this manifold. This had to be prefabbed, and it did have the headers, which still has the original number stamped on them. And Ford, the racing people at that time stamped a lot of numbers on the parts.
Is that the same as these numbers here?
Yes, it is. These numbers were on the car originally prior to racing, and they're, well, you
they don't
see
look
that,
quite the same there.
Well, that one's flipped over because of the stencil. Evidently, they just painted it over here, then held it the same side over there, and repainted. So we put it back exactly like it was.
Even if it was wrong.
Even if it was wrong.
But it's authentic, by golly.
We tried to copy it as authentic as we could possibly do it. Suspension-wise, the spindles are Lincoln. The brakes are Lincoln brakes, heavy-duty brakes. The brakes in the front are Ram air-cooled. The brakes in the rear have a little electric motor on there with the ducts running to them to cool those.
Well, let's go on around back and show me some of the other things you had to do to bring this back. You did some pretty serious fabrication, didn't you?
Well, there was some serious fabrication that took place, but however, a friend of mine, Bob Chambers in Vacaville, California, fabricated this piece, and this is actually a copy of the original from a picture of the original, and there's actually 8 pieces of flat sheet aluminum in that, and of course he had to cut the suit and beat the fit to make this part. He also fabricated the tonneau cover, the windshield.
How about the tanks in this car? What does it have?
Fuel tanks, it has 2 tanks, a 20-gallon tank down below and an 18-gallon in the trunk.
Tell me some of the interesting features of the inside.
Well, I guess the dash is obviously not a stock Thunderbird dash. The plexiglass windscreen doesn't stop a lot of wind. It's got, the gauges that you'd expect in a race car, water, oil, pressure, and temperature.
And what do we have over there?
That's
behind the
an
aluminum
oil
shield.
cooler on the other side over there.
The pipes come right out the side.
Right, and they're heat wrapped. That's probably not totally original, but they're,
It's got to make for a more comfortable ride.
Well, more than anything else, it keeps it from baking the paint off the side of the car.
Well, that's pretty expensive paint too, I understand. So.
Yeah, I can vouch for how expensive the paint was.
Well, okay. Well, let's get on with it. Let's take this baby out and run it around.
I'm ready.
Okay. As this 40-year-old race car roared to life and began building a head of steam, my first impression was, boy, this is one strange-looking bird. Its profile reminded me of an aircraft carrier. Bo had not driven the Battlebird for more than a couple miles since the restoration was completed, and unfortunately, a couple of miles was all it would travel today. Our taping ended shortly after it began when Bo signaled that he had a problem. Hey Bo, that's the most you've driven this thing, isn't it?
The most it's been driven in 30 years, I'm sure.
That's your run?
I didn't run too well. We have a little clip fell off the throttle, and so you couldn't get any throttle. It just idled when this fell off, obviously.
Well, it's just straight unit movement at all.
Yeah, it's probably maybe a 2-cent part. Stopped a $500,000 car. Does it every time.
In the early 1960s, Henry Ford II wanted one thing more than anything else: to beat the Ferraris and win the World Sports Car Championship. And the car that put Ford at the top of the racing world was the legendary GT40. When we decided to do a story about the GT40, we contacted the leading collector of these rare cars, George Stauffer. As it turned out, we had to share the track with a couple Indy Lights teams as they practiced. Several of the drivers, all in their early 20s, walked over and asked us what kind of car we were taping. Boy, kids today. When we informed them it was a GT40 from the 1960s, they all wanted to climb behind the wheel.
The GT40s, in my opinion, are fantastic cars because of their history. They're the only American car that ever really did that well in international racing. They're beautiful to look at. It's a very emotional car. They're absolutely fantastic to drive. There's no rational reason. When you start collecting things, can you really explain why you do it? It's a love for the car. It's a love for the history. And I just fell in love with the cars in general.
So you got this one in '83?
This car in '83. I bought my first GT40 in 1980. This car in '83, it's an interesting story. The car was purchased with 3 others by some investors from the East Coast. They took the 4 cars, put them in crates, shipped them to Belgium, stacked them in a warehouse, and just left them there for 4 years, basically, until their advisor said, now it's time to get rid of them and go on to something else.
So you bought all 4?
I bought all 4, and that's the only way they would sell them. I had Ronnie Spain from Scotland come down. Ronnie is the guru.
Authority.
He's the authority, the world's authority. This car was in primer, did not have a chassis plate, so the owners had no idea what it was. They knew it was a Mark II. They didn't know any of its history. When Ronnie Spain first saw it, he became very excited because this car had sort of disappeared off the face of the earth. Actually, the other 2 GT40s did too. And he had no idea where they were.
Well, this is the one that won the '66 Le Mans.
Yes. And when Ronnie first saw it, he sort of thought it was, but he didn't want to say that it was without further checking. There are certain things that he looked at, and it took him, I want to say, 4 or 5 months to be 100% certain.
So George, can you show me some of the unique features that helped you and Ronnie identify this as the '66 Le Mans winner?
Certainly. Some of the things we can't see, there's holes in various parts of the chassis for ducting. There's holes in the floor that were unique to each car. Several things that are quite visible would be the cooling slot here that was put in by hand on every car, and every car had a different slot.
Almost a signature, eh?
Absolutely. The other thing was the roll bar. These cars all had roll bars installed after Ken Miles was killed, and each roll bar, like the slots, were put in one by one, individually, so they were all different.
Now, the fuel setup in this car, the fuel tank setup, was kind of unique too.
The fuel tanks are actually in either side, right in this area, coming back to here. And initially they had fuel bladders. This is a 427 with a single carburetor. It puts out, or let's say in 1966, it put out 485 horsepower. It was a relatively low-key engine. They were built for reliability. They were built for power, but mainly reliability. To run 24 hours, you have to have an engine that will last, obviously. The engine is not that different from what you could buy in a Fairlane 500.
It's amazing. Now these are interesting too. These are actually luggage compartments, right?
The rules in that day dictated that the car had to be road legal. It had to have headlights, taillights, blinkers, had to have 2 seats, and it had to have room for luggage. And that is the only place really that you could put a luggage compartment.
And I bet it got kind of warm.
It must have gotten very warm, especially after 24 hours. The cockpit is actually quite spacious. You can see with the bubble, gives a little bit of extra room. What we had to do, because I'm 6'1", we had to do some modifications in the cockpit to make it roomy for me. One of the things that make a car win is that the driver is comfortable, and if he's comfortable, he can drive much better.
Well, George, we're sharing the track with some Indy Lights today, but they're going to knock off for lunch soon. Do you suppose we could take it out on the track for a couple hot laps?
Let's do it.
All right, let's go.
I've driven and ridden in a lot of cool cars over the years, but my dream has always been to ride in a genuine GT40. With George behind the wheel, the GT40 performed as if we were on a warm-up lap at Lamar Sebring. The car's interior is small by passenger car standards, but surprisingly comfortable, even when the G-forces have you pinned into your seat. When we returned to the pits, it was time for professional driver Mark Gillis to strap into the GT40. Mark was hired by a Japanese auto magazine to test and review this Ford racing legend. It didn't take him long to post short straightaway speeds in excess of 160 miles per hour. The combination of the sound of the roaring 427 and the thick, damp air of our overcast day made me wonder if we were actually in England instead of Wisconsin. But then again, when you get a chance to see a GT40 at speed, it doesn't matter if you're on the moon. After about 15 hot laps, Mark returned to the pits with a smile on his face and nothing but praise for the GT40. My thanks to George Stauffer for making one of my lifelong dreams a reality.
Well, that's our look back at all the legendary Fords we've had the honor of taping over the years. Our thanks to all the people who appeared in this video for sharing their piece of Ford history with us. Man, all this talk about high-power Fords has got me itching to do some driving. So until our next meeting, remember, Ford, first on race day. I'm Dennis Gage. Happy motoring.